Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Lakeisha Vaughn. I am the Deputy Director at DHCD for the Special Population Programs. And today you are logged into the Tenant Training 101, which is a training course for case managers under the Maryland Partnership for Affordable Housing. This training will be provided by the Maryland Department of Disabilities, Chelsea Heyman, who is the Housing and Policy Director, as well as Christina Boyard, who is the Housing Program Administrator. This is the first of 4 trainings that are required in order to receive the tenant training certification. Just some housekeeping. If you could wait and put your questions in the chat in the Q&A. And if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. We will be likely answering all the questions at the end. Any questions that I can answer along the way, I will do so. Thank you so much. Take it away, Chelsea.
All right, sounds good. Thanks everybody for joining us this morning. This is our second installment of the Tenant Training 101 series. We offered this last year, and I will go ahead and just start sharing my screen so you all can see my PowerPoint here. Okay. All right, so let's see. Just to review, we do have several speakers that are going to be joining us as part of this series. As you can see here, myself and Christina will be hosting this session. We'll have Diane Dressler working with Lucian Parsley. That's going to be our final session at the end of session number 4. That'll be on reasonable accommodations and modifications and some fair housing information. Penny Scrivens will be presenting with Marianne Graham and Lisa Waddell. That will be our week 2 presentation. And just to indicate here, we also will be having Renita Broadwater and Denise Lopez from the Coordinating Center presenting on emergency preparedness as well. That will be our 3rd session in the series. In the event that you haven't registered for all of the sessions, I'm asking that people go ahead and make sure that you've done that. If you're interested in getting that certificate, like Lakeisha mentioned, I will provide a link. I'll put that in the chat for you all to look at the original invitation that was sent out. In that invitation, there are individual links to each Zoom webinar that we're offering for this series. So go ahead and make sure that you register for those as well. Just to let everyone know, in the event that you happen to miss one of these training workshops, one of the webinars, you are welcome to view the recording. Go ahead and just send me an email, let me know. And upon receiving your email, I will send you a recording of the training from YouTube and a competency quiz. And that quiz will give you just kind of like just to test and make sure that you attended the training and that you understand the content. Once you've completed that, I will review your answers, and that is perfectly fine. If you happen to miss a session, that'll be how we process and ensure that you're still able to get that certificate at the end of this workshop series. Okay. So this kind of goes over what I was just discussing, but this is actually it's not a 3-part, it's actually 4 webinars total for the Train the Trainer series. And what we're going to be doing this year, a little bit different from how we handled this last year, but as part of the overall certification process, you'll be expected to either observe myself and Christina from MDOD or Marianne Graham or Lisa Waddell from MDH conducting a tenant training in order to get a sense of what the content is that they present on, and then as an add-on to that, we would be observing you with doing a tenant training with one of your clients or consumers who is leasing up a unit either in the 811, Weinberg, or MFP Bridge program. If we have any concerns during these shadowing sessions, then we will certainly let you know and ensure that you have the right information, that you're giving the right information to clients. One of the things that we'll be doing as part of this overall training series is giving you some resources. And I highly recommend taking a look at the outline that we provide you, that we'll be providing you with, that kind of goes through a punch list of like specific things you want to make sure you hit upon when you're meeting with your client as they're moving into their unit. And you're also going to be referring a lot likely to the My Own Front Door booklet, which is really intended for tenants when they're moving into the community or have decided to live independently. This is a very handy, helpful book to go through with your client or your the consumer that you're working with as they move into the community. It has a wealth of information about everything from making a budget, from looking at emergency preparedness plans, from paying rent. It's very, very comprehensive. And the other documents you want to make sure that you have ready to go when you're doing these sessions with them that will be, shadowing you on. You want to ensure that you also have a copy of their lease. So the 811 lease, if the person's in the 811 program. And you want to make sure that you have a copy of those community rules for the community that the individual is moving into. So these are going to be documents that you're going to be referring back to many, many times. So this is just our process that we're going to follow. So the first part, of course, is this training course, the courses, and then the second part is going to be the shadowing. If you have questions, you're welcome to email our general email box, the housinginfo.mdod@maryland.gov. So this just gives you an overview of the purpose of tenant training. Tenant training is extremely important for tenants who are moving from either, institutional settings, from living in shelters or experiencing homelessness, or moving out of residential rehabilitation programs. This is a really, really important tool. And the reason why it's so important is because it really gives people, it briefs them on what exactly it is that they need to keep in mind in order to be successful in the community, and in order to feel like they have a good foundation that they're working off of. So as you might imagine, when you move into any new apartment community, there's a lot of questions that might come up. You want to know things like, who do I contact for maintenance issues? What if I have an emergency maintenance issue? Who do I get a hold of? You might want to know specifically when things like trash, what the trash days are, where to take your trash. It's really helpful to set tenants up for success by providing them with a training opportunity and briefing them on what they need to do in order to be, in order to be comfortable where they are. So we highly, highly encourage starting this conversation, even when somebody is in the process of leasing the unit. You want to start talking to them about the fact that they'll be going through tenant training. And then once they sign that lease, discuss tenant training with them. It's a great opportunity to actually sit down with them and say, all right, let's work on scheduling the tenant training as your next step to just go over the features of your apartment and also what the expectations are as a resident here in the community. Okay, this is the poll. I want you to use the chat to respond to this. So poll, true or false? To be able to conduct tenant training independently, case managers only need to attend today's workshop once. Is that true or is that false? Respond in the chat with your answer. Okay, great. I'm seeing a lot of falses. Good. That's great. People are paying attention. Very good. Okay. So here's just a description of tenant training overall. It is a one-time appointment scheduled with a new resident. Normally, we conduct these up to 1 month after they've moved into their apartment. These are most effectively delivered in person, but we have been conducting them virtually since the beginning of the pandemic or over the phone. I have found that individuals, some people are preferring phone contact as a way of completing this part of their orientation to the new community. But we've also been able to deliver some of these virtually. And normally case managers, when we're doing this part of the process, what I have found is that case managers will sometimes meet with their clients, maybe in an outdoor space, and they'll use a laptop that has a video connection. Some will be in the actual unit with their client, also using either a phone or a laptop to show video. And this is for individuals where perhaps I'm conducting the tenant training and they want to shadow me as I go through some of the content with the new resident. So that's normally when we see this occurring. So really it's up to what your agency's protocol is. So I typically advise individuals that are working with specific populations. If your agency has particular protocol around COVID and also interacting in person with clients, defer to what your agency is allowing for you to do, obviously, and then we'll work around that from there. Most of these have been done virtually or over the phone, but the reason why they're more effective in person is because we really go through the whole apartment with someone. So I'll give you an example. If an individual is blind or visually impaired and they need, say, some kind of modification for them to determine specific settings on their stove, right? So maybe they need a little dot sticker on one setting and 2 dots on another setting to indicate that there are 2 separate settings on the stove. That's hard to do virtually or over the phone, but there are ways to ask questions in order to determine whether that's something that might be needed. And part of the process of doing tenant training requires a discussion about reasonable accommodations or modifications that the person might need to live in the community. A key thing about tenant training is that you're going over the lease with the person. The Section 811 lease, I can certainly provide everyone with a copy of that document, but it is on the DHCD website for the Section 811 program. There's a copy that you can download and review in advance. I recommend having that copy, a blank copy ready. You want to make sure that when you meet with the person that you're working with, that they have a copy of the lease that is on the 811, the actual 811 form. That's pretty critical. And then of course, you're going over community rules, lease violations, any sort of cleaning and maintenance needs that the apartment might have. So even if it seems very basic, definitely talk about things like ensuring that you have the appropriate sprays, sponges, toilet cleaner, things like that. And if the individual is in need of those things, right, then maybe there's a need for a conversation of, okay, well, these are things that you might be in need of. What's your plan with going to pick up these items? Or do you have someone who's going to provide them to you, et cetera? Lease violations are really critical. I would certainly take a look at the community rules and ensure that the person you're working with knows what specific activities might cause them to possibly receive a lease violation, ways that they can work through and also ensure that they're following the community rules and not experiencing any violations. Okay, so trainer requirements. So who can train? We have here, of course, I mentioned MDOD staff and MDH staff. I'd say most commonly, that's going to be the 2 entities that are going to be providing the training to tenants. But we also have individuals who attended our session last year who are now able to conduct the training independently. They don't need our involvement or assistance with that process. We have some case managers from different agencies like the Coordinating Center, Image Center, and Independence Now who are fully trained to provide their own tenant training. So we'll, of course, add to this list as we have more agencies certified to do this work. Okay, so why is tenant training important? Just to kind of review, again, I discussed this in prior slides, but tenant training is really important because you're really going through with the person what parts about housing, aside from just actually signing that lease, moving into the unit, what are their goals when they're living in the community? What are the things that they need in order to live in the community successfully and happily? So of course, among these include things like a discussion on reasonable accommodations and modifications. You're ensuring also that the person, if they have any concerns about the community, say tenants have a question about whether or not, there's any sort of, I don't know, concerns about safety, concerns about how it is that they can exit the building in the event of an emergency. These are all things that, of course, the property manager may go over some of this information, but it happens so quickly. Lease signings happen so quickly, and it's possible that going through the process, there might be information that was missed, right? So that's another thing to just kind of keep in mind, that it's important to review. And you're scheduling these about a month out from when the person has moved in and signed the lease. So this is really a good time for the person to have had a trial period living in the community, and they're going to have questions. They're going to want to know specific information. Another thing too with tenant training that's really significant is perhaps there's other sort of savings programs that the person qualifies for, like energy assistance, that they're not receiving already, and they might need assistance with putting in an application for it to help with working on their budget and ensuring that they have enough funding in order to sustain other activities that they want to commit to in the community. The other things too, just to say, it's really beneficial for case managers too. So it gives you an opportunity to do research depending on what the individual needs. So say somebody needs help with accessing food resources. This gives you a chance to research things like food pantries in the area or other resources that might be out there to help individuals access low-cost food items. So it is an opportunity to educate yourself as well. So I definitely encourage you to look at it that way and think about how it'll benefit both your client or your consumer and yourself as well. All right, so here's another poll. This is a yes or no. You are conducting a tenant training at the new apartment of your client who is transitioning out of a residential rehabilitation program, RRP, licensed by the Behavioral Health Administration. Your client has asked for your assistance with identifying the bus lines in the surrounding area so they are able to attend their therapy appointments. Is this something that you should cover in tenant training? So please use the chat to provide some responses to this question. Great, thank you, everybody. Yes, that's correct. So again, this is another opportunity. This is a learning opportunity for you and a learning opportunity for the client, right? So not only are you becoming more familiar with what bus lines might be surrounding that apartment community, where you could have other clients residing there or other people that might reside there in the future. So this really helps you overall with becoming more attuned to the different resources that might be beneficial for your client to know about. Okay, just a general overview of housing programs here. I always go over this in every training, and I really emphasize, please make this clear to your client as well, because what often happens is that when somebody moves into a new apartment, they may believe that they have a voucher, and this is not always the case. Some individuals might actually, in fact, have a voucher, maybe if they're in a program like the MFP Bridge program, which is a tenant-based rental subsidy, or the DDA rent subsidy program, also a tenant-based rental subsidy. However, the 811 and Weinberg Apartments programs, they are not tenant-based housing programs. They are project-based, as well as the Community Choice Homes program. So to go over this briefly, in a tenant-based housing program, the tenant finds their own housing, and they usually pay about 30% of their total household monthly adjusted gross income to rent and utilities. This is standard. It's also applicable to project-based housing programs, as you can see here. So that's a standard criteria that all of the housing programs are going to be following, that are under the purview of MDOD. Eligible applicants are individuals or families who have an annual income of 50% or less than the area median. So that's for tenant-based housing programs. So just things to keep in mind in relation to that. Project-based housing programs entail a subsidy tied to a specific unit within an approved project. So for Weinberg and for the Section 811 program, an individual they are moving into an apartment, and the apartment is affordable because of a subsidy that is already tied to that apartment. They are based in low-income housing tax credit buildings throughout the state. And so an individual cannot move using that subsidy. It's tied to the apartment. So that's something to go over with your client, emphasize that. I can't emphasize how important it is to talk to your client about that, because they really need to consider whether that apartment's going to meet their needs. Is it something that is ideal for them based on either maybe where they work or volunteer? Is it close to where they work? Is it close to family if they use their family as a support system? All of these are conversations that I would encourage you to definitely have with your clients when they're in the process of leasing up a new unit, and particularly as they look at the unit. You want to ensure that they are looking at the unit and ensuring that it has the features that they need in order to live independently, or could it be modified for that purpose? So again, all parts of the overall leasing conversation, but also the tenant training conversation as well. Eligible applicants are individuals or families who have incomes not exceeding 30% of the area median income. So that is a key difference between the tenant-based housing programs and project-based housing programs, serving a little bit lesser of an AMI bracket. So I'm going to go over the Section 811 program. This data is a little out of date, but certainly pretty close to being accurate to what our current situation is. We will eventually, the 330 is going to be around 400 permanent supportive housing units. Currently, right now, we are not at that mark, but we had received, and this was announced somewhat recently, additional funding from HUD in the third award, and that will be contributing to our overall permanent supportive housing unit number there. The program type, it is a project-based rental assistance program. They are located again in multifamily housing developed with DHCD affordable housing financing. As I mentioned, they are located in low-income housing tax credit projects. All of the units are integrated, so no more than 25% of the units are designated for people with disabilities. The reason why this is the case is because we want to ensure that people have an opportunity to live in the community of their choice and live with a diverse population, so they're not living in institution-like settings again. So person transitioning out of a nursing facility, the last thing that they're looking for is to live in another setting that is reminiscent of the nursing facility. The intention is that the person has a chance to live in a community of their choosing, and to live in a community where there is diversity and there is a number of different residents from different backgrounds. For 811, eligible applicants have to be between 18 to 62. They have to be disabled as defined by HUD. So there is a specific HUD criteria as to what that entails. We can link that in the chat later on. They do have to be Maryland Medicaid recipients. We do check Medicaid numbers. The Department of Health, MDH, they do review and check the applications to ensure that the Medicaid numbers are accurate and that the person is a Medicaid recipient. And they do have to be eligible for long-term supports and services. This could be through one of the Medicaid waiver programs, DDA waivers. Could also be individuals who are receiving supports from a Center for Independent Living as well. The person's income has to be at or below 30% of the area median. So that includes SSI level income. An individual for the 811 program does not have to have income. So that's a distinction of this program versus some of the other programs that our department oversees. Their total rent contribution is going to be 30% of their income for rent and utilities combined. So this is important because when the person receives their lease from the property manager, one of the first things you want to check is to make sure that the rent that they've indicated on that lease is indeed 30% of the individual's income. And it's going to be also factoring in, of course, utilities as well, but ensuring that that calculation was done properly. If you have any sort of suspicions or feelings like it's not accurate, please reach out to us so we can talk to the property manager or reach out to the property manager directly to ensure that that information is updated and that the person's paying the correct amount for their rent. This slide just goes over some of our priority populations for 811. Excuse me, I'm a little bit sick, so I'm trying to go through this. So our first priority population is going to be individuals who are transitioning out of institutions and Medicaid recipients. So that would be people coming out of places like nursing facilities, state psychiatric hospitals where they're receiving Medicaid assistance, individuals at risk of institutionalization due to their current housing situation. So that'll be inclusive of anyone who is living in deplorable housing conditions. Those who are moving to independent renting. So it could be people who are receiving DDA Community Pathways waiver, living in a group home or ALU, a brain injury waiver ALU, or coming out of residential rehabilitation programs. And then our final priority group is going to be individuals who are homeless Medicaid recipients. There's an order here that's listed. The key thing about these priority groups is that when you've entered somebody's application into our waitlist management system, which is hosted through SocialServe, you're going to be indicating what their current living situation is. And these are considered different living situations. So if in fact the person's living situation changes, you're going to be prompted to, of course, go back in and update information. So I encourage you to go back in and make those changes, particularly while the person's still on the wait list, because it could change their likelihood of getting offered a unit more quickly, or it could also affect their ability to move into a unit more quickly, but also B, it's going to be important information for us to know as we're going through the process of cleaning up applications on the wait list. If there's any application that hasn't been touched recently or hasn't been modified, then that's going to be of concern to us. And we're going to want to make sure that that person still actually is interested in housing. So when you go in and you make these changes and it's indicative to us that the application is up to date, that all of the information is there and the person is still interested in a housing opportunity. So it's really important to ensure that the person's priority group is correctly indicated in the SocialServe system as you're entering in their information. Okay, so this is a slide that just kind of describes where the Section 811 project rental assistance funding has been allocated. The first award, as you can see here, was focused on the Baltimore metropolitan statistical area and the Washington metropolitan statistical area. So those are the counties where the first award was delivered. The second award was statewide, as well as the third award. So really what we typically see when we're going through this process is that DHCD is receiving applications from developers who are pursuing low-income housing tax credits to build affordable properties throughout the state. When they've received these applications and made these awards, they're going to come to us, and the Department of Health will review the applications that they are recommending perhaps as a good fit for the 811 program. And we check out things like what amenities are in the area, what's the access to transportation like for a person living in that area. So we really look holistically at the entire project and determine whether or not we think it's a good fit for the program. And it is a conversation that we have between the state agencies working together to ensure that we are selecting communities that make sense for the people's needs on our wait list. We look at the wait list data. Again, another reason why keeping your applications up to date is important. But we also look certainly at what is in the surrounding area? Would this be a good fit for a person with a disability, and why? The Weinberg Apartments program, as I was talking about with 811, Weinberg Apartments, these are again also project-based affordable apartments in the community. Initially, the program was funded in 2011, so it predates 811 a little bit. The initial award was $2 million in funding and was intended to serve individuals at incomes of 15 to 30% of AMI. So I want to point that out because an individual does have to have some income to qualify for the Weinberg Apartments program. They do have to have a certain amount of income. In addition to that, we did receive another $2 million award in 2016. That was, the income targeting was actually lowered a little bit to 10 to 30% of the area median. Again, they have to have some income. It has to be at least within those ranges. The third award also has a 10 to 30% income targeting, but it also, when it was delivered in 2020, we received the $3 million in funding. Some new priority groups are added by the foundation and to ensure that they're offering new opportunities to different groups that were in need of housing. So I believe I should have a slide that goes over that as well. Eligibility, as you can see, looks very similar to 811. One of the critical differences here I want to point out is that, again, we have that income requirement, as you can see, at least the 10 to 30% of AMI, but also the person has to be receiving SSI and or an SSDI cash payment. Our system now prompts people to indicate that information, and we have a more accurate way of capturing that data through some enhancements that we made recently to the system. But I do want to ensure that people are aware that that is a requirement for the program. The person has to have that as a way of being able to qualify for one of the apartments through Weinberg. One thing I do want to point out, and this is applicable also to 811, there's a criminal background requirement, and of course checks are done by apartment communities when an individual is leasing up a unit. So the standard criminal background requirement, both for Weinberg and for the 811 program, is that an individual does not have a lifetime sex offense registry requirement on their record or a conviction for production of methamphetamine on federally assisted property. So this is going to be applicable to LIHTC communities, low-income housing tax credit communities in general. But it's important for me to point this out for 811 and Weinberg, because what this really is indicating is that as a case manager, you want to ensure that you're having these conversations with your client. If somebody has these two criteria, they won't qualify for our housing programs. So alternatives have to be determined. And I want to make sure that people are aware that really having this conversation up front is going to set your client up for a more successful transition, because we want to make sure that people are not set up in a situation where they believe that they're able to qualify when in fact they do not. So definitely a conversation worth having at the outset with the person that you're working with. And you can use resources like Maryland's judiciary case search system in order to look at an individual's possible past offenses and to have perhaps use that to help like broker that conversation if the person is not really upfront or isn't like having a direct conversation about it initially. You want to make sure that you know that information. Okay, so the prioritization for Weinberg 1 and 2 and unit identification process, very similar unit selection process. I'll talk about that a little bit after the first section here. So you can see that the prioritization, of course, you know, I mentioned previously that we're looking at current living situation for the 811 program. Very similar, but we're also for the Weinberg 1 and 2 grants, but we're also looking at all of these factors as well. One thing I do want to mention is that both programs look at an individual's date/time/date timestamp of the application to the wait list. So our wait list has an algorithm And that algorithm looks at these factors, these different priority factors, as well as when the individual's application was added to the wait list. So when we look up and see, say we're leasing a property in Calvert County, and that particular property has 1-bedroom units, we're going to be looking at our wait list and saying, okay, hey, who has indicated that they want to live in Calvert County and they specifically want a 1-bedroom unit? When we do that search, we actually are able to generate a full list of individuals who have indicated that criteria, and that's how we start our outreach process. So it's really based on those two pieces of information, date/time stamp in their living situation, or in the case of Weinberg, a couple of different factors related to both living situation and also an individual's readiness to move and eligibility for long-term supports and services. Unit selection for the Weinberg process, again, similar to 811 in terms of how that process works, but specifically for Weinberg, the development has to have DHCD financing, and they have to have some kind of nonprofit involvement. So the Weinberg 3 prioritization, as I mentioned earlier, there was a change in this grant that we received in 2020, where we had some additional priority considerations that the foundation wanted us to factor in when we're going through the leasing process. So for these groups, we're specifically trying to target these groups more when we do our outreach for those units in particular. So transitioning youth with intellectual and developmental disabilities between 18 and 35, who are living with aging caregivers, either in a group home setting or transitioning from permanent supportive housing, individuals and families who are homeless, and youth aging out of foster care who are disabled and homeless or at risk of homelessness. So when we're doing a actual leasing up of a unit for the Weinberg 3 program, which we have not done quite yet, but we're looking at individuals who meet one of these 3 criteria. And our waitlist system has been updated to reflect this information. So if you have someone who you know is on the Weinberg waitlist that you've entered in maybe a couple of years ago, but they meet this criteria, please log in and go ahead and make those changes and make sure that we have that updated information. So when we are leasing up a Weinberg 3 unit, we're able to reach out to the client that you're working with to let them know that they could be up for an opportunity. Okay, MFP Bridge Subsidy. So this program, the eligibility is that an individual has to be MFP eligible. They must have completed an MFP questionnaire, signed a consent form, or they are a brain injury waiver participant transitioning from an ALU, alternative living unit. Individuals have to be 18 or older, a household income of $19,000 or less, and they have to also meet the requirements of local public housing authorities and the Housing Choice Voucher Program. It's a tenant-based rental assistance program comparable to a Housing Choice Voucher. And after 3 years, the individual transitions either to a Housing Choice Voucher or project-based housing in a participating jurisdiction. In Montgomery County, it is project-based housing that the individual transitions into. Supports planners assist an individual with applying for the program, looking for housing, and then they also supply documentation to the Public Housing Authority and the landlord. These are the participating jurisdictions for the MFP Bridge program. So as you can see here, you can kind of see what the commitments are in the counties where there are subsidies available. We have multiple subsidies available in the counties that are under the purview of DHCD, as you can see, as well as Carroll, St. Michael / Easton, Hagerstown. I'm not sure if we have Hartford indicated here in St. Mary's. Marianne, are you on the call? Because I don't know if this information has been brought up to date. Is this still where the subsidies are currently available? I don't know if she can unmute herself, but okay. I'm going to allow Marianne to talk, so if she wants to interject, she can certainly do so.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So the so basically we have openings on the DHCD side in terms of the Eastern Shore and Western Maryland.
Okay.
So we do have some openings still available in those areas. Unfortunately, Howard, Montgomery, and Prince George's County are all full. And we are still working with Baltimore County and Baltimore City to determine if they have openings available. I think that they do, but we're still communicating with them about that. And also the same for Anne Arundel. I believe they responded last year that they had some available, and I don't think we've made any referrals to Anne Arundel County for quite some time. But we're in the process of trying to get in touch with all of the public health authorities, public housing authorities to, determine exactly where we stand with the remaining commitments.
Okay. Just to answer a question live, because it's applicable to this, Etta asked, does MFP include foster transition clients? I don't believe that it does, but.
No, I'm sorry. I guess I don't really fully understand her question.
Yeah, I'm not foster transition clients. Etta, could you explain a little bit more in the chat what you mean by foster transition clients? I'm not familiar with what that is. I assume she means transition foster care youth, and I don't believe that it does. I can't hear you.
If
Etta.
if the person has a developmental disability and is in a group home and wanting to transition to the community, then yes, they could be eligible for bridge subsidy. But if they're, not in that narrow category, then no.
Right, that's what I figured. Okay. Okay. And we'll, Etta, if you have more questions about that, I'll unmute you at the end so we can take that question. Okay, the Community Choice Homes Program, or CCH, this program is specific to Montgomery County. It is a partnership between our agency, MDOD, and the Housing Opportunities Commission of Montgomery County, or HOC. The program is intended to provide 30 HOC-owned rental units, and the affordability period would be 15 years. They're intended for people with disabilities who are extremely low income. Again, the person's paying 30% of their monthly household adjusted income for rent and utilities. One thing I do want to make sure everyone's aware with respect to this program, there is a live work preference. So the focus is going to be on people who either live in Montgomery County, and this is eligibility requirements. They have to either live in Montgomery County, have a Montgomery County address at the time of referral, or have previously lived in Montgomery County. I believe that the time period is a 5-year time period, although I don't know why it's not listed here on the, let's see. Here we go. The county, they have to have lived in the county within 5 years of referral, and possibly they're in a situation where they currently live outside of Montgomery County, either in an institution or group living setting. So that is part of the eligibility for the program. I'll kind of jump back here. We are typically pulling applicants for this program from the Weinberg Apartments waitlist, but we also will pull referrals from the 811 PRA, or Project Rental Assistance waitlist, depending on how many referrals we are able to generate from the Weinberg list. Individuals have to also be on the HOC Housing Path waitlist. So a person that is pulled as a referral for this program, they do also have to have an application in with HOC housing path. So that way they're documented on the HOC side as well. Income and criminal background is verified by HOC. And then in addition to that, of course, an individual is working with their case manager to, again, ensure that any sort of reasonable accommodations and modifications are relayed to HOC and the property manager. And they also are being active and participating in tenant training and providing some supports for the tenant to live in the community. Again, this is eligibility criteria is between 18 to 62. And of course, I mentioned here the criminal background cannot include a lifetime sex offense registry requirement or a conviction or production of methamphetamine on federally assisted property. Okay, I believe, Christine, I believe this is where your slides begin, but I
think so.
also do want to mention, because let's see, go back to this. I'm going to stop sharing because I do want to briefly talk about the DDA rent subsidy program, since that is an additional program that is new. It is a program of the DDA, but MDOD is providing support for this program in the form of managing the wait list for the program. So I do want to have a little, let's see, I wanted to pull up a slide on that. So bear with me one moment while I get that together. Does anyone have questions that you want to ask while I pull this up? And you can put those in the chat. So this is taking a while to. I cannot see the questions, so if you have any questions, if someone else can assist with answering some of them while I pull up the slide that I'm trying to get together here. Chris,
So far.
okay. Christina, could you put links to my own front door, the links that we have on the website in the chat while we go through this, just to make sure that people have that information? Okay. So just to briefly go over the DDA rent subsidy program, so people are aware, this is a tenant-based rental subsidy program. It allows for a household to pay 30% of their total income for rent and basic utilities. Eligibility for this program is for adults age 18 and above. They have to have a household income at or below 50% of the area median in the county where the housing will be located. They do have to receive at least one DDA service, or they're on the wait list for services in the crisis resolution category. And they also cannot be currently housed with a rent subsidy from another public source or reside in public housing. The priority groups for this program, eligible applicants, they are prioritized for the program in the following order. They have to be currently receiving state funds from the DDA for rent, and they have to meet some of the homeless criteria. So homelessness is the second priority group. There's a couple different special specific categories of that subset. Transitioning from a long-term care facility or institution, living with a caregiver who is 55 or older, or who is no longer able to care for the applicant, transitioning from a group home, shared living, or foster care, and all other eligible applicants 18 years of age and older participating in one of the DDA waiver programs with a housing support goal. A key feature of this program is the person has to be receiving assistance to apply for the program with a housing support services provider. So that is something that the DDA checks on the individual's eligibility as part of this program. So simply entering in an application or a waitlist registry it means that that's actually going to be checked over by the DDA to ensure that the provider that's entering the information is indeed a housing support services provider. And typically the referral process happens through a CCS, a coordinator of community services. They work with the individual if they have a housing related goal and get them referred over to HSS services. I will put a link to the DDA's website on this program, which has all of this information spelled out. So that way you can review some of the prior PowerPoints that have been done on the program and presentations that have been completed, and you have that information handy. All right, so I will go ahead and Christina, do you want to go through your slides, or do you want to share your screen to go through the slides?
I mean, if you want to just keep yours up, that's fine with me.
Okay, one moment.
Can I advance from? Oh, no, wait a minute.
You'd have to share your screen and advance your slides.
Okay. Give me 1 second and I'll open it. I'll
Okay.
open.
While she's working on that, I'm going to go ahead and, goodness. I'm sorry, I'm trying to. What are the, so I've had a couple, looks like a couple questions have come in. If a person is in the 811 program and commits a crime on the property, is it considered a federal offense since it's a federal program? As an example, caught with marijuana. That is not something that the program determines. That would be something that a judge would determine if it's what type of offense it is. So could that be something that causes the person to get a lease violation? Absolutely. That would absolutely be a lease violation. And it certainly would, it's not allowable. An individual cannot be using marijuana on the property, even if they have a medical card, because it's illegal at the it's not legal nationwide. It's not legal at the federal level. Okay, and then Michelle asked, what are the ages for transitioning aging youth? Thanks, Lakeisha, 18 to 35. You're welcome, Jonathan. Let's see. I'm gonna provide a link to my own front door website. So you all can kind of follow along there. And so in the chat, I'm pasting a copy of the website with my own front door. And then I'm also going to give you all a link to the DDA housing website as well, so you can view past presentations that have been done on the DDA rent subsidy program, which includes all of the information that I just went over. There's a link there. If a tenant is diagnosed with anxiety and requests her parent to live with her, is the parent's income added to the lease? And would that make the client ineligible financially? Yes, the parent's income is added to the lease if the person is not considered, if they're just simply another household member, then yes, their income is factored in. The circumstances would be a bit different if the individual is like a live-in aid. And yes, if it's a two-person household, the income is considered ineligibility, and it could cause issues with her continuing to be eligible for the program. We'll go through that information later in this training series, so stay tuned. So Amy, please email me about this situation. It sounds a little specific. That's my recommendation. Okay, Christina, you ready?
I think so. Finally, after several minutes of trying to open this one tab, I was
No
finally
worries.
able to get it open. Okay, so this is a copy of the My Own Front Door tenant training manual that we provide to each of the participants that are in the 811 Weinberg Community Choice Homes programs. So if you meet with us, we bring it with you. We bring it with us to give to the participant. In some circumstances, we've mailed them directly to the property, especially during the pandemic. We've been mailing them directly to the property or dropping them off at the property to give to the property manager to distribute to the tenants. In some cases, we meet the case managers and hand them out to them so that they can give them to their client. Chelsea and I think we both shared a link to this book. It's a good resource to have even before they move into their unit. It has a lot of good information for budgeting. It has information on, what a person can afford, how much will it cost to move, resources if there's, issues or concerns with the property and paying rent and being a good neighbor. And there's just lots of really good stuff that's in there before someone gets housed. So if you have an opportunity to take a look at it and print it out, I would recommend doing so, just so that you have the information, because I think it's helpful to anybody that's applying for any type of housing. So this is one of the tools that we used during the tenant training process. We typically also bring the information on community rules. We try to bring a copy of the HUD 811 lease to make sure that that's the copy you have, as well as the 180-day medical leave addendum that everybody should be signing as part of the 811 program. So all of those things are what we use as tools so that you can have the information. I mean, this book was designed, for people with disabilities, for their families, and for case managers who are helping people move into the community. I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought because I'm like reading these slides and I'm like, wait a minute, I think I said all of these things. So right now, I just looked, there's no link on our website for that tenant training manual, My Own Front Door, but we'll make sure that we get that set up so that you guys can have a direct link if you forget where it is. So there are sections of there's another manual that we've used in the past, a case management manual. It's kind of a larger document book, and we have copies of those if anybody's interested. We've tried to bring them to different trainings when we were doing in-person trainings for those who don't have them, but it's information on how a person qualifies for 811, living situations. And there's four sections in that book. It goes over the Section 811 program itself, case management, and how the 811 program works, the application process, and then making sure that individuals are retaining the housing, and being a good tenant and things like that. If anybody is interested in getting a copy of that, like I said, we have plenty. So we are happy to send them out to you or drop them off to your agency so that you have them to share with other people in your agency. We also have done a training in the past called Your Money, Your Goals. This was designed by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. There's actually links at the bottom. There's that link to YouTube, because I think for some reason, I want to say there's 23 sections to the Your Money, Your Goals. When we did the training, obviously we didn't do all 23 sections. I think we probably did about 8 or 9. We took out the most important ones that we thought would be important for people with disabilities looking for housing and things like that. But like I said, they have YouTube channel, and they have all of the sections as videos. So if you want to take a look, they also have a really good website if you're looking for, information on, repairing credit, saving money. What happens if your client was a victim of fraud? What if they were had their identity stolen, what happens if they want to file a complaint against a credit card company. So they do provide a lot of good information. You can do a lot of stuff online. You can call, and they have information, or they have people that are answering the calls that can provide that information to you as well. We do have some of these books in the office. So if anybody's interested in getting a hard copy of the documents that we did, the training on, we're happy to share those. They had their own little booklet that was designed for people with disabilities. It was a small booklet. I think, like I said, I think we have some of those at the office as well. So happy to share any of those documents with you if you guys are interested in having something like that. But definitely a good website, like I said, for things like, credit repair, fraud, saving money, and different things like that. So during the pandemic, we also, a group of us worked together to put together this tips for being a successful renter. And we send that out to individuals as well before we do the tenant training, and just to kind of give them ideas of what's going to happen and things that we're going to go over during that tenant training. So we're going to review the lease. We're going to review that 811 lease addendum. We're going to talk about the utility allowance and how that works. And, utilities have to be set up in the individual's name that has signed the lease at the property. The tenant is responsible for paying the full amount. I'm going to, in a couple of later slides, we're going to talk about utility allowance and how that works. There's a section that we go over about emergencies and how to be prepared for those things, like, it's Maryland. We get every different type of weather imaginable. How do you prepare for snow, rain, hurricanes, snowstorms, a fire, things like that. What's your evacuation plan? Do you have enough food? Do you have canned goods? Do you have a can opener? All of those things that we talk about. What's your plan if you lose your keys? Some of the properties, most of the properties, if you lock yourself out between 9 and 5, the property manager or maintenance can let you back into your unit. But what if it's a Saturday or a Sunday? What happens? And what happens if you have to call a locksmith, and who pays for that? And different types of things like that. So we go all over things like that, and having a backup, make an extra key and give it to a family member, somebody that you trust. We've kind of written out some of the community rules that we've seen a trend, across all the properties that we've worked with, just kind of going over the do's and don'ts. I don't know that there's any property that we worked with that has a smoking policy. I would tell you that at least 98% of the properties are no smoking properties. That means no smoking in the unit, no smoking in the common areas. You have to go off the property to do that. Some properties have pet policies, some don't. Overnight visitors, we go into detail about, how long guests are allowed to stay, quiet hours. I mean, it's a lot of different information in there. Pest control, who does somebody call if they have a light bulb out? Who do they call if they need a roll of paper towels? Different things like that, making sure that they know, and I bring up something like paper towels because we've had individuals come out of nursing facilities, and they're used to picking up the phone and asking somebody for, tissues and paper towels. And we just want to make sure that they're not getting out into the community and calling the property manager, asking for, some of those things. So just a gentle reminder type of things. There's a big section that we go over about reasonable accommodations. There's even going to be a section in the tenant training curriculum that we go over for reasonable accommodations and modifications, and what people can ask for, and who pays for those things, and what type of documentation do you need. And so there's all of that information. And then we just, give some useful tips about, getting along with your neighbors and making sure you're a good neighbor and making sure that you have a good relationship with the property manager. And if you're, if things are not going well with the property manager or your neighbors, what do you do? Who do you contact? How do you get that resolved? Renter's insurance. Not every property, let me rephrase that. Tax credit properties are not allowed to require renters insurance, we encourage everyone to look into getting some type of renters insurance, because there's lots of different things that could happen along the way that, maybe you didn't think of, that maybe you thought the property would cover, but the property doesn't cover that, but renters insurance would. So a couple years ago, Chelsea had somebody come out from the Maryland Insurance Administration and do a presentation. He did a wonderful job. And the one thing that's kind of always stuck with me about that training is, one of the things that he mentioned that I don't know that we all think about is, if somebody comes into our home and, say they walk across the kitchen floor and they slip, like, who covers that? That's not the property. The property is not going to cover, medical bills for, your friend who slipped in your kitchen. If you had renters insurance, that would be something that renters insurance would cover and handle. If somebody breaks into your home or breaks into your client's home, who's going to take care of that? It's not the property. If you had renters insurance, it would cover that. There are some things that the property does handle and cover. So if there are damages to the unit, so let's say, your client's on the first floor and the person above, their tub overflows and, the water comes down and ruins a TV, we'll say. Yes, that could be covered by the property because that was damages, due to, something that happened inside the property. But like I said, we always encourage people to look into renters insurance. We can actually provide you a link to the Maryland Insurance Administration that does a nice job of breaking down all of the renters insurance companies that are in the state and different policies and what's covered and how much it costs. And we can give out that information as well. And then we talk about, moving out. If somebody decides that they no longer want to live at that property and they want to rent somewhere else, they have to give at least 2 months notice for most properties to move out. They're going, you have to pay your rent until you move out, and they have to clean everything out of the unit and make sure that there aren't any damages. And just a little side note, even though I know Chelsea talked about this earlier, I'm just going to reiterate, when somebody decides to move, Section 811 does not go with them. So Section 811 is not a voucher program. It's not a true voucher program which you can transfer and move to another location. In order to receive the rental subsidy, they need to reside at the property that they have signed a lease with and agreed to participate in the program with. Okay. We've been trying to share a document for an emergency contact list just for folks to have something that they can put up on their front door, maybe put on their refrigerator, somewhere where they have all of these numbers, because if it's, like the rest of us where we've become very dependent on our phones, sometimes it's, your phone dies or, something's broken or you can't get into a certain section. So sometimes it's nice just to have a printout of, those phone numbers, those important phone numbers, property managers, maintenance office, if there's your medical contact, your doctor's names, a family member, things like that. So we have these that we've been printing out and including as part of the package. We can share those documents as well if you'd like to have them. This was a third, I couldn't fit it on that one screen. Just a third type of emergency contact list. Some of them are just whatever works for your clients as far as being easy to read and share. Okay. Okay, so here is some other utility information. So we encourage individuals to do budget billing, to get on a budget billing plan, even though they have assistance with utilities. Well, not exactly. There's a portion that is set aside to cover their budget, their utilities, and we'll go over that in a minute. But we do recommend that people apply for budget billing. The Office of Home Energy Programs, they have 3 separate grants. They cover MEP, which is Maryland Energy Assistance Program, and that's a separate program to apply for. There's the Electrical Universe Service Program. They help with financial assistance with electric bills. And then there is the Arrearage Retirement Assistance, and that helps customers with large past due electric and gas bills. And they can apply for a grant up to $2,000 towards their past due bill. And then we've also done a few trainings with the Office of People's Counsel, and we try to make sure that we get out the emails. If you're not already on their listserv, we try to forward all of the information that we get from them when it comes to, I mean, especially here lately, I've seen emails coming through about the cost of, the gas prices going up for, especially for BG&E, just for utilities in general, the cost of energy for the electric piece, and how people are going to cover those bills. And then there's information on how they can apply for assistance to, if they're having difficulty paying for those utility bills. The Office of People's Counsel has some programs that can help provide assistance with those issues. So I encourage you, if you're able to sign up with their listserv so that you get the information too. Otherwise, if you're on any of I usually send it out to the case management group. So if you're interested in participating in the case management group meetings, they happen every other month. But even if just to sign up to get the information, we would gladly share it with you. A lot of times we have individuals that are moving into new areas from one jurisdiction to the next, so they're not always familiar with transportation. There are several counties that do a really nice job, that have a really nice website when it comes to different types of transportation in their area. But we try to give information on the public buses. If there's any trains like Rail Metro, the MARC train service. Is there paratransit in the area? Have they applied for the MTA Mobility Paratransit Program, which runs in Baltimore City and Baltimore County? And then I think even, and then within each county, they also have different programs with the Department of Aging and the health departments. Eastern Shore has a very different bus route. So, I mean, if anybody on here has clients on the Eastern Shore, you guys know that it's a very different system. There are mini buses, out there. There are private options. Nowadays we have Uber and Lyft, and, there are taxi services and, look, Uber and Lyft is there on demand online services. Ambulettes, a specially equipped van for transporting individuals. There are volunteers. There's a team of volunteers that, drive their own vehicles and help people get to appointments and different things like that. There's a dial-a-ride and, a shared curb-to-curb transportation service. And that's for individuals who are 65 and older. And they're going to, there's also vouchers. There's taxi vouchers, and I'm trying to think of, I think, and maybe if Marianne wants to jump in, I do believe that there are certain things that medical assistance covers for transportation to doctor's appointments.
Yes,
I'm not mistaken.
Christina,
Yes.
there is non-emergency medical transportation. So that is something that can be accessed. Actually, if people want to email me, that's fine. I can get them in touch with our department within our Office of Long-Term Services and Supports that, works on that and vendors. But each county has a vendor, I believe, that they use, but it's specifically for medical appointments.
And within the county, they don't cross over, correct?
I don't believe that they do. No,
I don't believe that they do either.
I'd
So
have to
just-
confirm that, but I don't believe that they
I
do.
am like 99% sure that they do not cross jurisdictions. And I know that because we've had some individuals when we first started working, the first 811 property we had, which was up in Hartford County. We had a couple of individuals that had moved from Baltimore City, and in Baltimore City, they had used the medical assistance transportation option. but it was not something that they could use from Harford County into Baltimore City. So it does not carry over from county to county or to the
Yeah.
city.
I'll check. I was noticing that Etta had put a couple of comments in the chat regarding issues using it for people who are trying to go to therapy appointments. So I'll ask my colleague about that and see if I can get an answer related to that.
Okay. All right. So, sorry, I was just looking at the chats. Okay. Okay, so here we go, understanding the lease. So a lease is a signed contract. It is a contract between the property owner and the tenant. It gives the tenant the right to live in the property with certain rules. And the property has, there are certain rules that the property has to follow, just like there are certain rules that the tenant has to follow. The very basic information on a lease is going to be the name, address, phone number of the property, the name of the tenant and their new address, the length of that lease, who are the people that are going to occupy the unit, the amount of rent and the security deposit, when the rent is due, the date that the rent is due, and if there are late charges. There's going to be, as I said, everybody's got these rules, the responsibilities of the tenant and the owner, conditions for termination, and then it talks about that utility responsibility. Just a real quick note for Section 811, there are no late fees to be charged. So if your client has had that happen, please let us know. We'll go back to the property and discuss. But there should not be any late fees assessed to anybody for the Section 811 program. Okay. So this is just the front page of that 811 lease. I put a link in our presentation. We're going to send this presentation out to everybody, so you will get a copy of this so that you can see. It's a 10-page lease. So this is just the very first page of the lease. I didn't put all 10 pages, but that way you can kind of get the idea of what it looks like, and making sure that your clients are signing that lease and have a copy of what it looks like. Oh, we also have a copy of the Community Choice Homes lease in here. The Weinberg program, they typically just use the same lease that the property uses for all their other tenants. But you get the idea. It's going to have the property's information, the person's information, who's living there, all of those types of things. Okay, so I kind of touched earlier on some of the community rules or house rules, but these are rules that they're provided by the management company. If we have them early enough when we do the calls with the case managers for a specific property, we try to give them out as soon as we get them, and then we try to make sure that we remember to bring them with us when we're doing the tenant training, so that we have them to discuss. Some of the properties are kind of crossover because it's the same management company, but they usually have their own set of rules that are specific to each property that can be reviewed. The property manager or whoever is in charge of the lease signing, they should be going over those community rules with the participant as they're signing their lease at move-in. That's kind of what makes the process such a long process when they go for lease signing. If they have any questions that we're not able to answer, you should always go back to the property manager. The tenant can ask the property manager as well, because I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions that come up along the way. Maintenance issues, what are they? What counts as an emergency, what counts as an emergency maintenance issue? In the summer, is it air conditioning? In the winter, is it heat? A toilet that they can't, unstop, a power outage. But there's a power outage, I would kind of with a condition of, did they look outside and everybody else in the property doesn't have power? So was there a storm? Do you need to call the utility provider and alert them that there's an outage? if they look outside and there's no, everybody else is without electricity, then that's the situation. But if it's just happening in their unit, yes, that's an emergency. Call call maintenance, put in an emergency ticket to say, hey, here's what's going on. Make sure that they have that maintenance number. We can put it on that document that we had there for emergency phone numbers. Making sure that individuals are, keeping their apartment clean, and keeping up with everything, because I don't know if, I'm just going to mention this anyway, if we haven't already mentioned it, when the property management company can come into the unit at any time and do an inspection. It's typically done usually at recertification time, but I can tell you that they might actually do it when, pest control is out and about. Or, if the management company gets called in for, something's not working, they're gonna take a look. They're gonna look around and see what's happening in the apartment. If there's, concerns about cleanliness, it could be a verbal warning. It could be a lease violation, that they're gonna need to consider, how are they going to, change their habits? How are they going to, get the unit clean? Is it a situation where it's a person that has way too many items and maybe they need some decluttering tips, things like that. There's other, things that I was talking about earlier in that one slide about smoking. The smoking policy is always going to be listed in the community rules. That smoking policy is going to be anything from, cigarettes, marijuana, vaping, candles, incense. It usually covers all of that. Sometimes it's completely a no flame property. And I've seen a lot of communities now putting rules in there about vaping and things like that. So definitely something to consider, if somebody's working with somebody that's a smoker. That overnight guest policy is super important. I would tell you that a lot of our lease violations and our situations have resulted in, overnight guests and visitors and things like that. One of the things that is a little difficult for individuals to kind of wrap their head around is that, who that leaseholder at that property, they are also responsible for the behaviors of their guest. So just like there's, no smoking for the tenant, that covers the tenant's guest. So if you have, your friend Joe over and, Joe is smoking, and they're going to give you the lease violation because, Joe is your guest. So just kind of make sure that you're having that conversation so that people understand that, they need to make sure that their guests, their visitors know the rules and what they're not supposed to be doing so that it doesn't affect their housing. Every property has quiet hours. I would probably tell you they're between the time frame of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. They might vary by an hour or so at the property, but that's going to be in those community rules. What happens if there's a situation at the property that's not being resolved and you need to put your rent into escrow? That's something that you have to file for court and set that system up. And there's also what happens if individuals stop paying their portion of rent. They have to keep up with their payment, even if they're out of that unit for 180 days with that medical leave. The medical leave addendum for 180 days covers holding the unit, for that individual. If they're back in rehab, if they went to the hospital, for whatever reason, they're out of the unit for medical reasons, the program allows them to be out of the unit for up to 180 days, but they're still responsible for paying their portion of rent and their portion of the utility. So that still needs to be covered. And so there's, that non-payment section, lease violations and evictions. Typically, people have to have 3 same lease violation items. So it's, it would be 3 times that they've been given violations for smoking. It could be, if they got a lease violation for smoking and garbage not being, put away, and maybe they had a untagged vehicle in the parking lot. Those are 3 separate violations. So typically the properties aren't going to give you a notice to vacate just because of those 3. It has to be 3 of the same. And that leads me to notice to vacate. Notice to vacate is not an eviction. If they've had multiple lease violations and the behavior is not being resolved, they're going to be served with a notice to vacate. If they are, leaving the property on their own, they turn in the keys and they leave on their own, then it wouldn't go to the eviction process. If the person gets a notice to vacate and they want to appeal the process, and it's overturned, then okay, they go back to their unit and they can stay. But if they don't appeal, or they don't win the appeal, it could go to an eviction, and then it goes to court and it's on their permanent record, which will come up on their credit. Or I'm sorry, it will come up on their criminal background check because the eviction will be on there. And I'll just kind of give a shout out that we did a training a few months ago on notice to vacate, lease violations, and the eviction process. It's on YouTube. We can share that with you as well, because I think it was a really helpful training, and I think it provided a lot of good information to the group. Utilities, like I said, utilities need to be set up in the leaseholder's name. It has to be that head of household. That's the person that needs to have utilities. If the property finds out that the utilities are not in their name, that is a lease violation. If they find out that the person never, the tenant never got utilities, that's a lease violation, and those things have to be rectified and corrected, and the bill has to be brought up to date. Otherwise, it could lead to a notice to vacate or the eviction. Okay. Okay. So I'm a visual person, and so this is kind of my favorite screen, my favorite part of the training, so that people know how the subsidy works. There's a little bit more detail into figuring out, individuals, the participants' portion of the rent. There are deductions, there's medical deductions, there's a deduction for a person having a disability. But, at the end of the day, this slide right here is kind of like the quick and dirty of how to figure out someone's portion of rent. So in this one, so for the Section 811, Weinberg, Community Choice Homes, all the programs, individuals are paying 30% of their income for the rent and utilities. And that's what we call the total tenant rent. So if you look here in this example, Grace receives $783 each month. 30% of her income is $235. So the monthly rent is the total tenant rent minus the utility allowance. So for this property, the utility allowance is $75. So Grace's portion of rent is $160. So basically, what the point of this slide is, at the beginning of the month, when Grace gets her SSI check, she's going to put aside $235. She's going to pay $160 by check, money order, pay online, however the property takes rent payments. She's going to send $160 directly to the property to pay her portion of the rent. The $75 that's left over, she's going to use to put towards her utility bill. So when her bill comes in from, we'll say BG&E, and it is, maybe Grace is, aware of the electric usage and that she's using. So she's, a little more conservative with what she's using, and her bill comes in and it's $60. She pays $60. That extra $15 that she has that left over, she can do whatever she wants with it. She can, put it back into her budget. She can, if she wants to start a savings account, she can put the, the money there. But that $15 doesn't go to anyone. It stays with Grace. Now, if, it's warmer and Grace is using the air conditioner a little bit more, she likes the unit colder, and her utility bill comes in and it's $90, then Grace needs to take the 75 that she has put aside to pay the utility bill and then go back into her budget and find the other 15. She would be responsible for finding the other $15 to put towards the utility bill to pay the entire 90. So that's why we encourage budget billing. We encourage, folks applying for MEP, just to make sure that they have the money to cover that portion of that they're responsible for the utilities. I'm sure you guys probably have worked with clients that have no income. And so maybe you're saying, okay, what happens to my client that has no income? What do they do? Individuals that have no income, the program pays for the entire portion of the rent. And then the property will send the tenant a check for the utilities. So let's say Grace had absolutely no income. And let's say the rent at the property altogether was, $11.65. The program pays $11.65. And then the property that Grace resides at will send her a check for $75. And then she uses that $75 to pay her utility bill. Again, it's the same situation of what happens when, Grace goes over that $75. Grace is going to need to have a backup plan. That's why we encourage MEP. That's why we encourage the budget billing, because at the end of the day, if that, Grace has no income and the bill is more than $75, she is going to have a way to pay that additional amount. She would be responsible for it. Okay. Now, I'm going to pause right here, even though this is my last slide before we get to contact information, because I always know people have lots of questions about how the utility allowance works. So if, I don't know, how do we have this set up, Chelsea? People can be unmuted or raise their hand and we'll unmute them.
Yeah, so we could do either, honestly.
Okay.
It looks like Nancy Devon asked, how is the utility allowance determined? But
Okay.
I believe you just went over that.
No,
So
I think
no.
she probably well, this is my guess, and Nancy,
Okay.
you can kind of chime in if I'm wrong. Every property, it's actually determined by HUD. So there is a formula that HUD uses that goes by square footage of the units to determine how that utility allowance is set up. It will change after a year. Especially if it's a brand new property, because they'll go back and they'll look at the usage, based on the whole entire property, square footage, people in the units, things like that. So it could change after a year when they go through their recertification. It could change sooner, but the property would always let the tenant know by sending a letter saying, the utility allowance portion or the utility portion has changed. Even when it does change, if Grace's income is still $783, 30% of it is $235. So whatever the utility allowance is and the rent should always equal $235. But HUD is the agency that determines what the utility allowance is for each of the properties. So hopefully that's what Nancy meant. And
Yeah, it looks like she
Okay.
said that it answered her question.
Okay.
There is another question. Let me scroll up a bit that Renita asked. Does the 3 lease violations have to be given in writing?
I do not believe so. I think,
Yeah, I don't think so either.
because they should be, even the ones that are verbal have to be documented in their file. Because otherwise, how do you know that they even happened? So I have had properties say to me, on such and such a date, they were given a verbal warning, and then they were given, this one in writing and this one in writing, because before they can even give that notice to vacate, they have to go back to the property management company has to go back to their lawyer.
Right.
Their lawyer has to, put up that, they send out this, 4 or 5 page document, kind of giving all of the information and explaining what the lease violations were and when, and, what happened and things like that. So I do believe the verbals count. and they have to be
Mhm.
documented in their file. I can
Sounds-
verify that for you, Renita, just to make sure.
Okay, cool. There's another question. Is Renita asked, is there a written policy for overnight guests that you can share? Would this be part of the community rules? I know this is in the community rules typically, and I'm just searching through the 811 lease to see if this is spelled out. I don't
I
believe
don't
it
believe it's,
is.
yeah, I don't believe there's
Yeah.
anything specific within the 811 lease. It's usually in those community rules. And
Mhm.
like 90% of the time, it's, they cannot have overnight guests for more than 14 days in a calendar year. Now, are there exceptions to this? Absolutely. Things like, my grandmom's coming to visit and, she's going to stay for, 5 or 6 days. And you're like, oh, wait a minute, that's going to eat up, 6 of my 14. I can guarantee you, if you go to the property and you say to, whoever the property manager is, Lucy, hey, Lucy, my grandmom's coming into town. I just wanted to let you know that she's going to be here for a couple days, blah, 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 blah. I don't think that they're going to use that against you for those 14 days. And I don't think they're going to come to you the next time you have a guest and be like, okay, well, you only have 8 days left. I think the more notification that you can give them, sharing that you have somebody at the property, the more willing they are to, kind of bend the rule and not be like, okay, you've had somebody here for, 12 days, you're coming up, things happen, but relatives visit, people, visit. Give the property a heads up just so that they know and they're not caught off guard when they see somebody that they're not familiar with at the property that's been kind of, been seen around, but they don't know who they are or who they belong to, things like that. So I would just give them a heads up if, like I said, I think there are certain conditions that apply to that overnight guest. Somebody that's been there, for a month and is now receiving mail, that's a problem. Receiving mail, receiving packages, using the laundry room, different things like that. When it looks like they're living at the property, that's cause for alarm. That's a lease violation.
Right. Etta had asked, is there a utility allowance if they state it is included in the rent? Lakeisha responded, no. If the tenant is not responsible for utilities, there is no utility allowance.
But I would also add to that, I have not seen a property have utilities included in the rent.
Yeah, that's not, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, I've only
never
seen that under tenant-based.
Okay.
Okay,
vouchers,
that makes
not
sense.
necessarily project-based.
And I only wanted to mention that because I've had a couple of case managers like reach out to me where their clients are looking specifically for, a property that has rent and utilities included in the, I just haven't. So what if a person is approved for a live-in aid?
What is the question?
Yeah, what, I don't know.
I don't know what Michelle's trying to ask.
So let me just guess. I mean, I'm gonna guess. I don't know if this is true, but so like if somebody's approved for a live-in aid, they would need a 2-bedroom unit. So then, are you asking, is the utility allowance larger for a 2-bedroom? Yes. I'm trying to think of what all the possible questions could be. The live-in aid, their income doesn't count towards total household income, so they wouldn't be responsible for a portion of the rent or the utilities, unless they have that agreement with, who they're living with, that, they agreed to pay for something. That they're the only things that I can usually think of that come up with in this section. So if I'm wrong, let me know what your actual question is. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Oh, no, it doesn't count for the live-in aid does not count for as a guest, because even though the live-in aid is not on the lease, they did their own screening and background check. So the property knows that that person should be there because they've already filled out the live-in aid has already filled out their own separate application like documents. So the property does know that that the person has a live-in aid. Unless you're asking if the live-in aid has to follow the guest policy for their own guest, and then I would tell you yes. What if the person lives at the property, wait a minute, and becomes eligible for a live-in aid? So if they become eligible for a live-in aid, then they would need to, I mean, are they already in a 2-bedroom unit? So if they're in a 1-bedroom, then they need to request a transfer for a medical situation because they now need a live-in aid and to, go into a 2-bedroom. And then that live-in aid would need to go through the screening process. How would the person get the live-in aid approved so they could have one in their income? So when they apply for the unit, they need to have, there's a whole packet just for live-in aids for each of the properties. So there's documentation that needs to be completed by a healthcare provider. There's paperwork just for the live-in aid that they need to complete.
I'm not seeing any more questions at this time. I know there are some people that had some pretty specific questions about either clients or consumers that you're working with. And I definitely encourage you all, if you have a very specific question, either contacting myself or Christina, or if it's such that it would require discussion with the property, say somebody had mentioned something like a religious exemption for usage of candles, that's something to talk to the property manager about, because we would not necessarily be able to grant an exemption of that kind since we're not managing the property. That would be a conversation that would have to take place with the property manager. And to be truthful, I haven't had that. We haven't really dealt with anything like that, to my knowledge. Questions like that. So, if I did know the answer, I'd be happy to provide it, but I'd say it's a property by property type question, I would imagine. So. And we can, I know that we talked a little bit about some of the resources. Christina had the tips for tenants for successful tenancy. We are happy to share that resource with you all. It's one that I recommend using when you're going through tenant training with the people that you're working with, just because it gives you like kind of a cheat sheet for things that you should touch upon when you're having those initial conversations once they've moved into the community.
And we could probably also share like the outline. I know that I know some of the case managers from the first training we did had requested that outline. Just because it's a nice, it's almost like a pre-agenda. It's something that's nice to just kind of run down as a checklist to make sure that you cover everything.
Yeah. Okay. I don't see any additional questions at this time, but I will, let's see. Has anyone had any issues with registering for some of the other sessions that we have? Have you all been able to do that? And you can just put your information in the chat. Yes, okay, great, all right, excellent. So what we'll do is after this session, obviously we're recording. Yes, we can send the link. So what I'll do is once this recording is finished, I will go ahead and upload this training to our YouTube page, and I'll send out a follow-up email with any of the attachments that we're discussing today, like the My Own Front Door attachment, the tips for successful tenancy. And in that email, take a look at that, because that will have a link to the invite, the original invite that has all of those session links in there. So I'm not going to email anyone individually. I'm just going to be sending it out to the whole group. So I ask that you do not send me a direct email asking where it is, because it just give me a moment, I will send it out. And so take a look at your emails and please go ahead and register. As a reminder, our next session is going to be on Thursday, June 30th from 10 to 11 p.m. Same time, same place. Our speakers will be Marianne Graham, Lisa Waddell, and Penny Scrivens. They will be talking more in depth with a tenant training manual, the lease, community rules, keeping the unit clean, use of appliances, and damages to the unit. So if you had questions from this session that you did not feel like were adequately answered, we're going to do a deeper dive in our second session. So, please hold tight with some of those very specific questions, because we'll have that reviewed in detail during our next presentation. So thanks everybody for attending this morning, and I hope you all have a good rest of your rainy Thursday. So take care. Thank you.